for like the Bhagavad Gita, a Nectar of Devotion, Nectar of Instruction, Sri Upanishad. And then after going through that, there's the next level up, which is the formal study of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and that's called the Bhakti Vaibhava, which he has undergone study, completed his studies in that. He in Philadelphia, he has roots here in Philadelphia. So the Philadelphia Temple was his home for quite some time in the early and mid 90s, late 90s, in which he did a lot of service to Philadelphia. A lot of devotees, benefited quite a bit from his preaching, his outreach. I was one of them. The first time I met devotees, it was actually Carucandra who really, his talk really kind of sunk into me and made me realize some of the principles of Krishna consciousness and how important they were. So his preaching styles, I think, are quite effective. He's in the area now, so to speak. He's up in Jim Thorpe, in northern Pennsylvania. Some of the year he spends in Mayapur, continuing his studies. And in other parts of the year, he has a project in Kentucky, which is kind of an off-the-grid, self-sustaining sustainability project that he devotes his life to. So it's a little bit about him, and we're happy to have you. And hopefully, this is not a one-time thing. That during this time when you're available, you can give us as much association as possible. So,
I'm happy to be here. You always give the nicest introductions. I feel that you're not really describing me, but it's nice that you said these things anyway. Some, I mean, the facts were true, but
more to describe. In the interest of time, we could.
So while you're waiting, I would like to inform you, maybe you already know, I'm pretty sure. There is a lady out of England, I believe, Jahnavi Harrison.
Sure.
She sings the Kirtanas extremely well. I was wondering if ISKCON usually invites people from other countries here.
She's been here. She's been here before. Yeah.
She spends a lot of time in New Jersey also. Her sister lives there.
Oh, does she?
The whole family spends a lot of time in New Jersey.
Okay. Thanks for telling. It's close by. Hopefully I can use it.
So we can begin. The way we've been doing the verse, typically, sometimes we've been doing a call and response, but it actually works better, I think, if the speaker does the verse 3 times, and then we don't call and respond. Once the speaker's done doing the verse, then we'll actually open it up, and each individual have an opportunity to chant the verse.
Sure.
So we can begin that way. We can get the verse up on the screen. Anishwar, do you have it?
Yep, it's coming up right now. And I'm going to just mute the microphones. Just if there's any background noise, I will just kind of mute the microphone. If you are on a telephone, you can hit *6, and *6 will unmute you. So if you wanted to speak and you had a question, just *6 is a simple way to become unmuted. So just a little note there.
Vrindavaneshwari, are you going to mute after we recite the verse or now?
No, I'll wait until after. If there's background noise, I'll mute, but I'll wait.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Vrindavaneshwari Matri, you said I should start with Jaya Radha Madhava? Is
Sure.
that correct?
Yes, sorry, I'm muted. Yes.
Oh, okay. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavalabha Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavalabha Girivaradhari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Okay, so today's verse is, well, we're actually going to finish off the 5th chapter of the 10th canto. The verse that we'll chant today is text 30, and that has a short purport, but then we'll also finish off the chapter. We'll read verses 31 and 32, just to finish that section off. So first I'll read, I'll chant this verse 3 times. And like Dronacharya Prabhu said, after I chant it 3 times, if anybody wants to join in and just chant it themselves, then you can do that after. So this is 10th canto, chapter 5, text 30. Nunam hyadrishta nishtoyam adrishta paramojana adrishtam atmanastatvam yo veda na samuyati. Nunam hyadrishta nishtoyam adrishta paramojana adrishtam atmanastatvam yo veda na samuhyati. Nunam hyadrishta nishtoyam adrishta paramojana adrishtam atmanastatvam yo veda na samuhyati.
Adrista nishtoyam, adrista paramojana, adristam atmanastatvam, yuveda samuyati.
Nunam hadista nistyoyam adista paramojana adistam atmanastadvam yoveda nachamuyati.
Nunam hi adrishta nistoy ayam adrishta paramojanaha drishtam atmanas tatvam yoved nasa muhyati.
Adishta nishtoyam adishta paramojanaha adishtam atmanastatvam yo vedo na mukhyati.
Nunam he adrishta nishchoyam adrishta paramochanah adrishtam atmanastatvam yo veda nasam muchyati.
Anyone else? I think that was everyone, maybe. Okay, so do we do word for word or just go to translation on Zoom?
Word for word.
Okay. Nunam, certainly. He, indeed. Adrishta, unseen. Nishtaha, ayam, something ends there. Adrishta, the unseen destiny. Paramaha, ultimate. Janaha, every living entity within this material world. Adrishtam, that destiny. Atmana, of oneself. Tattvam, ultimate truth. Ya, anyone who. Veda, knows. Na, not. Saha, he. Muhyati, becomes bewildered. Translation by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. God. Every man is certainly controlled by destiny, which determines the result of one's fruitive activities. In other words, one has a son or daughter because of unseen destiny, and when the son or daughter is no longer present, this is also due to unseen destiny. Destiny is the ultimate controller of everyone. One who knows this is never bewildered. And I'm just going to read the next two verses before I read the purport. Text 31. Vasudev said to Nanda Maharaj, "Now, my dear brother, since you have paid the annual taxes to Kamsa and have also seen me, do not stay in this place for many days. It is better to return to Gokula, since I know that there may be some disturbances there." And text 32, Shukadev Goswami said, after Vasudev advised Nanda Maharaj in this way, Nanda Maharaj and his associates, the cowherd men, took permission from Vasudev, yoked their bulls to the bullock carts, and started riding for Gokula. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports to the 10th canto, 5th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled The Meeting of Nanda Maharaj and Vasudev. So then we'll get back to text 30, and so I'll read the text again and then we'll go with the purport. Every man is certainly controlled by destiny, which determines the results of one's fruitive activities. In other words, one has a son or daughter because of unseen destiny. And when the son or daughter is no longer present, this is also due to unseen destiny. Destiny is the ultimate controller of everyone. One who knows this is never bewildered. Purport. Nanda Maharaj consoled his younger brother Vasudev by saying that destiny is ultimately responsible for everything. Vasudev should not be unhappy that his many children had been killed by Kamsa, or that the last child, the daughter, had gone to the heavenly planets. Om Jnana-timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakalpatrubhishcha Kripasindhubhyo Sapatitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So today I want to talk about three things. Generally, if I'm giving like a Bhagavad Gita class, I try to stick to one thing. But since this is Srimad Bhagavatam class and the audience is familiar with the subject matter, I want to go through three things because they're all linked and they all need to be understood in order for us to progress in our devotional service. So first I'll just say the things that I'm going to cover and then we'll get into them. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is free will and destiny. Again, generally when I talk about free will and destiny, it's a whole class, but since you guys already pretty much get the concept, I'm just going to gloss over that and talk about what the difference is. And, you know, because some people say there can't be both. There either everything's destined to happen or, you know, or there is free will. It can't possibly be both, but we're going to talk about how the reality of the situation is. The next thing we'll talk about is the paradox of the material world. We'll get mostly into that. And then finally, we're going to talk about the application of the knowledge. Whatever we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about how to apply it, and then what the results are if we apply it properly, and then what the consequences are if we misapply it. Because anything can be done properly or improperly. And obviously...
Are devotees here yet?
Yes.
Yes, we have about 9 people here, 8 or 9. We're good. Just go for it.
So as I was saying, anything can be used in the proper way or the improper way. So we can't expect the same results if we're dealing with something in the right way as we do if we're dealing it in the wrong way. So that's the most important thing in devotional service, is we have to understand how to apply everything. Otherwise, we can't expect the result of pure love of Godhead. So, as I mentioned, the first thing we'll talk about is destiny and free will. So this verse and many others talk about destiny, right? And so it's destiny that's responsible for everything, and that one who is on the spiritual path should attain this, what's called Brahma Bhuta. There's a verse in Bhagavad Gita 1854, Brahma Bhuta prasanatma na sochati na kankchati samasarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim labate param. It's that one who is transcendentally situated, He doesn't desire, hanker, lament for things. He's completely equipoised in loss and gain. He understands that everything is destiny. It's not up to him. And so we find a lot of verses like this. So naturally, you will get a group of people that say, okay, this is it. Everything is just destiny. You know, you can't do anything about it. The issue with that is if you only accept that everything is done by destiny, people can get very much unmotivated to do anything, because if everything's destined to happen, then I don't have to put forth any effort whatsoever. I can just stay at home on my couch and that's my destiny, right? But then we also have verses that describe free will, how each of us living entities actually has a choice, and that you know, we kind of make our own destiny, right? And what we get is we have these two people on these two different sides, the destiny and the destineers and the free willers, and they sort of argue with one another. It's like a politicized issue, and each person thinks they're right, and each person is quoting bona fide Shastra to prove that they're right. But the thing is that both destiny and free will are in play. That's what happens when something's in Shastra. It means it's true. But there's actually no such thing as a contradiction in Shastra. There's what we can perceive as a contradiction in Shastra. But actually, there's an art that the Acharyas teach us, is how to see how apparent contradictions are in fact not contradictory at all. And so the way we see how free will and destiny are both in play and both factors is that destiny is what we would look at as the big picture, right? Things that are beyond our control, that are just naturally going to happen. And free will is on a much smaller scale. It's just with us. We have free will to choose whether or not to do something. When we came into this material world, we came with a particular type of conditioning, which we brought upon ourselves throughout various lifetimes. We've sort of come up with this collection of layers of modes of passion, ignorance, and goodness that surround us, that give us what we call a conditioned nature. And in our conditioned nature, we have our own sort of destiny. We have tendencies that we will, you know, tend to follow. When a situation comes up, we will react to it in a certain way due to our conditioning, due to those layers of goodness, passion, and ignorance. But ultimately, each spirit soul has free will. We get to choose whether we are drug around by that conditioning, or we can choose to break out of that conditioning by engaging our consciousness in a higher platform, God or Krishna. So say, for example, my conditioned nature is that I like a certain type of music, right? And if I hear that a specific band, one of my favorite bands, is going to be in the area, I'm going to have a tendency to go and see them, right? That's a natural thing. If I'm attracted to something, I'm just going to go and see it, listen to it, right? But say that concert, it happens on the same day of a big Janmashtami celebration, right? And so I'm also attracted to that. Now, my conditioned nature will pull me to go see my favorite band in concert. But I can exercise my free will to say, oh, well, this Janmashtami celebration is actually more important to me, that I want to celebrate Krishna's birth and associate with devotees and hear about the pastimes of Krishna's birth like that. And actually, even though I really want to see this band, I can see them another time, or, it's just not as important. So we can use our free will to break out of what our natural tendencies or proclivities are. And in effect, we can actually change our destiny, right? Because it was our destiny to go and see this band. It was our tendency to do that, but we decided not to this time, and we engage in Krishna consciousness instead. So in that way, we can see that destiny and free will are both at play. So the destiny is what's going to tend to happen, and then the free will is, we can make a very small change, but only in ourself. And I say small change in the global sense. It's actually quite a big change in ourselves. But free will is just that. We have the free will to change ourselves, our own consciousness, but we do not have the free will to change the world in a collective sense. So generally here, there are even philosophies, popular philosophies out there. One of them is called, I forget what it's called actually. I just had it earlier, but now I forgot. Anyway, there's a very popular philosophy it's the law of attraction, it's called. There's a group, they call it The Secret. And basically it teaches people to meditate on what they want and put forth positive vibes into the universe that, they'll achieve whatever it is that they want. Right. And this is kind of taking free will way to a much bigger extreme than it can be. There's this saying, man proposes, God disposes. But in this particular philosophy of the law of attraction, it's just, whatever I want, I can get. I don't have to, I sort of don't have to pay for it. I just order it and it comes, and I don't have to in any way do anything to earn it, other than, putting out this vibe that I wanted. So that's an incomplete philosophy. That's someone thinking that only free will is at hand. And again, we talked about people who think that only destiny is at hand, and they end up really not doing anything, right? So in order to have a proper consciousness, have proper Krishna consciousness, is to understand how both of them are working. So as Nanda Maharaj was saying here to Vasudeva, that these things that happen in the world are out of our control. So it's destiny. So we can't really, we shouldn't be bewildered by such things when they happen, even though, they're very tragic. Vasudeva lost his children as soon as they were born. They were killed, and that's a huge tragedy. But it was something that was actually out of his hands. There's nothing he could do about it. Therefore, destiny is what we would focus on in that situation, because if we try to change something that we cannot change, then that is what we call self-consciousness. We think that we can control the world around us. But Krishna consciousness is living a life understanding that we are not in control of the world, that Krishna is. Now this brings up a point, and this is the second thing I want to talk about, the paradox of the material world. It's another popular belief these days that either God cannot exist, or if he does exist, he can't be perfect, right? Because people try to present this in a scientific way. They say that God cannot be simultaneously all loving and all powerful, because if he were all loving, he wouldn't want people to go through any sort of distress. So there wouldn't be anything like natural disasters or viruses, pandemics, things like that. So therefore, he couldn't be all loving. But if he were all loving and didn't want these things to happen, then it necessarily means that he cannot be all powerful. You know, he can't be both. So if he's all loving and he doesn't want these things to happen, clearly he doesn't have the power to stop them, right? So he can't be all powerful. And if he's all powerful and he can stop them, then he can't be all loving, right? Because, you know, clearly no one with compassion would let people suffer like this. And this is a philosophy that people, it's actually quite popular, that people say God can't exist, or if he does, then he can't be perfect in this way. You can't have those two things. And people use their logic to believe it, and they kind of feel good about themselves, and they go on living their lives as if God doesn't exist. But again, as I was mentioning earlier, anytime we find an apparent contradiction, whether in Shastra or in life, that there's always a way to see both sides of it and clear up any apparent contradictions. So in this case, the all-loving, all-powerful paradox of the material world is that the soul, as we understand from the Bhagavad Gita, it can't be moistened by water, it can't be burned by fire, can't be withered by the wind, can't be cut to pieces. The soul is eternal, and it doesn't go through the distresses that the body goes through. So when we identify with the body, we certainly experience all sorts of torment and torture, but we understand, at least in theory, we understand from the Bhagavad Gita that the soul doesn't go through these things. So even if someone accepts that, they accept, okay, the soul doesn't go through these things, but still you can't deny that there's some sort of, you know, psychological torture going on. And that if God were both all loving and all powerful, he wouldn't allow such things to happen, right? And that can make sense to a lot of people. But the reality of the situation is that in the spiritual world, where everything is perfect, everything is harmonic, everything revolves around Krishna, everyone is eternal, they're full of knowledge, and they're in complete bliss, all working together to serve Krishna. There are exactly zero problems there, right? Because everyone's doing their part. They work in harmony around serving Krishna. But the thing about love, because, you know, as I mentioned, everyone in the spiritual world, they're lovingly engaging in Krishna service. It's not that they're mechanically just, you know, engaging in Krishna service. So the thing about love is that it can't be dynamic or special if there's no option to not love. You know, if it's just a default setting, then what you have is just a machine. It doesn't have any it doesn't have anything special. It's not really love if there's no choice, right? So Krishna gave everyone a choice. That's called free will, right? So each living entity has the choice to serve Krishna, right? And be there in the spiritual world, everything happening concentrically and harmonically with no problems whatsoever. Or we can choose to not love Krishna. We can choose to try to live our lives as if we are separate from him, right? And without that choice, like I said, love can't really be anything special. It's just, you know, it would just be inanimate machinery. So therefore, there's free will. So there's a choice, okay? Now, since we are each part and parcel of Krishna, we are nothing, everything that we experience in this world, even the material world, is nothing but Krishna. Nothing exists besides Krishna. So that includes us. So since we've exercised our free will to forget Krishna, to live separately from him, then he has to put us, well, there's actually two options he has at that point. he can either blink us out of existence, because that's what our desire is. We're actually asking to be separate from him. And since there's no such thing as being separate from him, aside from not existing, so that's one option, just blink out of existence, right? And the other option is to create a situation where we think that we are separate from him. And I'm just noticing now that I'm starting to run out of time, so I'm going to shift gears here. So Krishna, since he loves us, his love is unconditional. It's not that, he has an option to not, he just loves us unconditionally. We're the ones that have this issue where, we want to rebel and try out, not being part of his grand scheme. So since he loves us, he doesn't blink us out of existence. He puts us in a situation where we think that we're the center, right? But since there are multiple rebellious spirit souls who want to try their hand at being the center of the universe, we're all here together in this material world, where we're sort of competing against one another for being the center of the world. We're all trying to control and enjoy everything that's around us. And that's why there's suffering, because we're actually not in control, but we think we are. And that's the cause of all of our suffering, that we think that we can do something about the world. And we try by our own efforts, and we can never actually solve the world's problems in that way, because we don't have the potency, we don't have the capacity. So therefore there's suffering, but it's all sort of, like I said, it's all sort of psychological, because the soul doesn't suffer. The soul's eternal. It's just waiting for us to understand that we're actually not in control, and that we can't do anything about this, and that once we tap back into the fact that we are servants of Krishna, then we can return to a life of peace, and then all the suffering is over. So when people come up with this paradox that God can't be both all loving and all powerful, they don't understand that actually, it was the most loving thing he could possibly do to put us in this temporary situation, that even though it's, like I said, psychologically damaging to us in one way, but it's not permanently psychologically damaging. It's just, while we're here, it certainly is a bad experience. But the alternative was to be blinked out of existence, right? So clearly, if he loves us enough to not only allow us to have this situation where we think that we're the center, but also, expands himself as the facilities in which we actually interact with, trying to be the center. That's just the most loving thing that there is. We want to forget him, and he allows us to forget him and expands himself and sees it the whole time. And anything that we're dealing with is just him, and he sees us just ignoring him on a daily basis. And that's true love. Most parents can't even say that they have that much love. Well, they can't, because they don't have that much love for their own children, right? I mean, it's the closest thing probably that we have to that kind of love, but it's still just such a shadow of it. So I want to get to the application of this before we open for questions, and I apologize for going over. So once we understand the difference between destiny and free will, and the limitations of each, so we know that free will is limited to ourselves, there's a proper way to apply it and an improper way to apply it. And we talked about that a little bit, but I'm just going to get into it a little more. So the misapplication of it is to, like I said, go more toward the law of attraction philosophy, and try to change the world just by our own actions. But as we understand in Bhagavad Gita, that you have the right to do your work, your duty, your dharma, but you're not entitled to the results. You're not actually the doer of the activity. You're engaging in Krishna service, And whether the result is good or bad, that's up to him. You're just supposed to do your service. So anytime we think that we are the doer, that is by definition self-consciousness. You know, we are ourselves in the center, and we think, okay, we are the doer. But Krishna consciousness, as I mentioned before, is understanding what Krishna wants and then engaging in his service. So the proper application of this knowledge is to be detached from the results of our work, but to constantly endeavor to redirect our consciousness from self-centric to God-centric. The results of applying this properly, to be, you know, constantly redirecting our consciousness from self-centric to God-centric, the result of that is that gradually we'll develop a taste, an attraction, attachment to doing things in this way that will actually shed all of our material conditioning, and then we'll just be engaging in Krishna service 24 hours a day, which, you know, that's the goal that we want. That's what we're looking for. That's Krishna consciousness, right? But the consequences, if we misapply this knowledge, understanding what destiny and free will is that we will perpetually be stuck in the material world, trying to control something that we have absolutely no control over, right? And as I mentioned, that just causes more and more suffering, because we're, you know, it's the most frustrating thing when you're trying to do something, right? And it just doesn't work, right? That's frustrating. But that's exactly what the material world is. We're trying to control things that are out of our control. We're not accepting that Krishna's in charge. And even we're trying to come up with arguments on how he can't possibly be in charge. You know, so many people are dying now, or so many people are losing their jobs, and this and that. And, you know, we want to say that, you know, this means there can't possibly be God. How could he want to put people through such stress, right? But when we understand that actually the stress is all caused by our own doing, because we're trying to control something that's completely out of our control. And, you know, the punishment that we're enduring isn't really punishment on his part, it's punishment on our part. You know, it's self-imposed. We created it, and it's not even eternal. It's not even a long-lasting punishment. It's actually so much more insignificant than we are giving it credit for. So as I see that our time is running out, I will open up for questions if there are any.
I have a big question, please.
Yes.
From a young age, back when I was in India, South India, I hail from, my mother and I used to go from high school days through college, etc., to Sangeeta Upanyasams and Katha Kalakshepams, etc. Two things that first confused, then bothered and irritated me in the Hinduism was they confuse everybody out of their minds. For example, in Ramayana, Ravana is supposed to have done so much penance and acquired so many powers that he actually made himself impervious to the effect of the Navagrahas. So nothing could touch him. So was I confused Hiranyakashipu. Finally, Lord himself has to be born as Narasimha to destroy him. And then I'm talking about this free will or destiny. And when people say destiny, to me, it goes everything against the karma yoga that Krishna taught Arjuna. So then Arjuna should not have fought at all. And then they bring in the love part. I have never heard of God as loving except in Catholic mission schools back in India. None of the other discourses, maybe hundreds I've been to, or more than 100. And so I was wondering if Krishna tells Arjuna, don't be swayed by the result. Feelings. Sthita Prajna is the one very close to me. Then where does love come in? Because if love is there, then it cannot be Sthita Prajna, and vice versa. And so why do we introduce the love component to Krishna when he's supposed to be impartial? He laid out the systems and then consequences, action, consequence, action, consequence. And then he sits back, he told us what the consequences would be and gave us the freedom of choice. And so why do we run to him after committing something when we were fully aware of the consequences? And then if it doesn't happen, then God is not love. God was never love to begin with, is my understanding. I was hoping you could throw more light.
Sure, I could talk a bit on that. So, well, there were a few questions that you had there, so I want to try to maybe take them one at a time. So you mentioned that sometimes the demons, they become more powerful than the devatas. That was the first thing you mentioned, right?
Yeah, no destiny. It's all will.
Right. So there is dharma in this material world, right? And dharma just means that you're doing things properly, right? In the material world, though. So there's a right way to do things in the material world and a wrong way to do things. Now, sometimes the demons follow dharma better than the devatas. Sometimes, you know, you'll see that Indra is sometimes also, he gets in these predicaments where the demons are more powerful than he. So what happens here is then just, and we're talking material dharma here. We're not talking spirituality. There's a difference between dharma and spirituality. There's the link because Krishna in the Vedas gave us dharma, and it's meant to bring us to spirituality. But if we don't apply it properly, like I was mentioning earlier, if we're using it for our selfish purposes, then it's not really spirituality. It's still dharma, but it's not spirituality. So that's how the demons can follow a material dharma better than the devatas, but their result actually won't be good because they can't return to Krishna until they engage in spirituality, right? They could just cause more problems in the material world. So that's one thing that I wanted to point out, that dharma in itself isn't necessarily spirituality. When used properly, it will definitely lead to spirituality. But when used improperly, it just keeps us in this material world. And then, you know, even if we become very powerful demons, still eventually we're going to get taken out. You know, there's no such thing as becoming more powerful than God. So that's the first thing. The next thing you were talking about is the aspect of love, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So, as I mentioned, the fact that this material world exists is proof that God is love. Because otherwise, when we exercised our free will to live separate from Him, then we just would have completely, you know, just vanished from existence. We wouldn't exist anymore. So, since He does love us, and since His love is unconditional, we have this opportunity in this material world to reform our consciousness, to go back to God consciousness and give up this self-consciousness. Now, in the material world, under the laws of dharma, we don't experience that love because it's just like this. It's like you do this, this happens. Here are the consequences. Like you said, there's an action and there's consequences. So in the material sense, it seems like it's not really, there's no love involved, and why bother putting it into the equation? But that's the point, is the daityas, the demons, they follow it in that way. They don't see the love, they don't see the connection, they don't understand that actually Krishna is in control of this. They just see, okay, this is how this system works, and this is how I can take advantage of that system, right? So there's a big difference between understanding how something works and, you know, actually using it properly. You know, we can understand, you know, a knife, for example, it cuts, right? So you can use that to stab somebody and kill them and take their money. That's taking advantage of it. Or a doctor can use it to operate on somebody and save their life. There's a different consciousness from this. It's the same thing. It's the same knife, and it's being used in the same way to cut someone open. But one, you're using it to take advantage of someone and take something from them. And then the other, you're trying to help them out, right? So in that way, in one sense, material dharma really doesn't have anything to do with love on that platform. But the goal of it, Bhagavad Gita 15:15, Vedascha sarvam aham eva vedyo vedanta krit veda vedeva chaham. It's that the purpose of the Vedas is to understand Krishna, right? It's to understand him and to engage in his loving devotional service. So love doesn't come into the factor until we understand the reason why the material world even exists. But we have to understand it in order to transcend this material world, because in the spiritual world, Sat Chit Ananda, eternal, full of bliss and knowledge, and it's a loving relationship. It's not a relationship of fear, right? Another thing that you mentioned in your question was that that Krishna, he can't love. He has to be, what was the word you used?
He should be unfeeling.
Unfeeling. In the 7th canto, the word used is, what is it? Impartial, right? Impartial.
Okay.
So the beginning of the 7th canto, before we hear the story of Lord Narasingha, there's a conversation. I think it's Yudhishthira Maharaj and might be Nard. I can't remember it offhand, but there's this question of how can the Lord be impartial? Because on one hand he says that he's impartial, but he's always helping his devotees out. So that right? So it doesn't make any sense. That he can't possibly be impartial, right? So this is how the argument was made, and so that leads to the story of Lord Narasingha. It shows how actually he is impartial. He doesn't really meddle. He allows us the free will. That's his impartiality. But when we make the right decision, then he helps us out, right? And that's just his nature. That also shows that he loves us. Means that impartial means that it rains everywhere, right? But if the seed's on sitting in some rocks, it's not going to grow. If it's sitting in fertile soil, it's going to grow. So the impartiality is that it's there, but there's still something that we have to do to receive it. So if we receive it, then he gives us much more advantage because we're receiving it. So it's like, so he throws a rope down. If we grab onto it, we can get pulled up. If we don't grab onto it, we can't. So the love is him pulling it up, and so there's both things. We have to put forth endeavor. We have to do something about it, but we have to understand that it's not our doing that's getting us the result. It's it's helping. If we didn't do something, we wouldn't get the result. But it's not that is giving us the result. It's a sort of tricky situation that we have to understand. But when we understand it, then the process goes so much more smoothly.
Thank you.
Did I get all of the questions?
Yeah,
Okay.
because this has been troubling me, the confusion in Hinduism. It started when I started learning about Dvaita, Advaita, and Visishtadvaita. And then it continues and kept increasing and increasing. And then at one point I thought, so arrogant in saying there are no two, we both are one and the same. To me, it was like a height of arrogance.
Yeah.
And I thought, why do we have so many people interpreting with what they see? And that's why it grew, because even though they are well-intentioned and sincere, they are still human, however high they are. And so inadvertently, their own prejudices and favoritisms would creep into their interpretation. And so just read what the Lord said and don't read any of the other Puranas. Just stick to the Gita.
Yeah, well, the other thing is that, logic, it makes sense to us at the time, but it's not necessarily sound. There are magicians, for example, that make you logically see something happening, but something else is in fact happening. And so we can't rely on that. We have to, we have to go through bona fide representatives. And, some of the trick is understanding who is bona fide. That's the hardest part at first, because there are a lot of cheaters. There are a lot of cheaters that are in the guise of devotees, and they're giving the philosophy, and they truly believe it, and they think that they're helping people by propounding their it's always a mix between actual philosophy and then their own interpretation of it, and they think that their interpretation gave them a unique edge that explains something that nobody else did, right?
Yeah.
But what Lord Chaitanya did is he took all of those philosophies and showed how they all simultaneously are going toward the same thing, and how to properly understand it. And that's, and that's what we do. We're followers of him. So fortunately, we're in this bona fide line where everything can be explained through the Shastra and through the sadhus and through our guru. So we're quite fortunate to have come upon this, because otherwise, when we do trial and error, we sort of try something out because, okay, no, that makes sense. And we do it, and we get some result out of it, right? But then, we find that, but there's some sort of limitation here. And then we try to find something else. So it's a much longer process when we follow it that way, right? But fortunately, we have all the tools we need are right here. We just have to understand them and then apply them properly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. Is there
Hare
anything
Krishna.
else? Anything else?
It's a really great class, Prabhu. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
This word destiny, is it synonymous with karma, or is there something more to it?
What was the word? Because you kind of cut out it there.
Is the word destiny, is it
Destiny.
synonymous? Is it the same as karma, or is there something more to destiny than just our karma?
Destiny is more like the big picture, right? So there's a lot of small things going on. Each of us we have our own individual proclivities, destinies. But destiny as a whole is taking all of those into account, all of those into consideration. So that's destiny. So karma is involved in destiny. I wouldn't say they're synonymous though, but it's certainly a factor in destiny. The collective karma, what's going on, will then give a particular result, which you would call destiny. So they're certainly linked, but I wouldn't say they're synonymous.
Would you say karma is action, destiny is the consequence?
Well, karma includes the consequence. Karma is both the action, but also the consequence that comes with it.
Okay.
And then you could say that destiny is collective karma. In a way. Is that okay, Dronacharya, or was that?
Yeah, and I guess just the follow-up to this is that we see this in relationship to Nanda Maharaj and Vasudeva, who are part of Krishna's Leela. And sometimes we see that even though these individuals are not necessarily affected by karma and such, and they're preaching it as part of the Leela. How are we supposed to take that? Maybe they're not aware that they're part of this Krishna Leela, and that's why they're speaking this way. But at the same time, they're not necessarily, doesn't seem like they're bound by this at the same time.
No, they're certainly not bound by it. Anytime Krishna comes down and his associates, they live by the rules for the most part. Sometimes they bend them a bit. Obviously, Krishna is the Supreme Personality Godhead, so he can do things that are, what we would call physically impossible, like pick up demons that are, way bigger than him, and, things like that, pick up mountains like that. But for the most part, he'll show, and his devotees especially, will show, the right way to deal with things. Like once you're a pure devotee, that you see everything as an expansion of Krishna, and then you're just engaging in a service, then you really don't have to follow the rules anymore. But the devotees do anyway to show the example. The Bhagavad Gita 3:21, and I think the verse either just before or just after it, 3:21, yad yada charti shastas tattare vitarjana sayat pramanam kurute lokas tara navartate. Whatever actions a great man perform, common men will follow. And whatever standards he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. And I think it's the verse before where he talks about kings like Janaka. Even though they were pure, they still showed the example, because otherwise, how are we going to learn if the people who have perfected something aren't showing us how to do it, right? So, no, they're certainly not bound by karma, but they will show the example of how it works. That way we can navigate our way through this situation and get to where we want to go.
I see that there's some people that are muted, Vrindavaneshwari. I don't know if they, I remember yesterday we had the problem with people were muted.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, Sue Davy, you're unmuted. Do you have any questions or comments?
Okay.
You're unmuted. Did you have a question, Sue Davy?
No.
Okay, good. Great class. Thank you so much. Really informative. And
I apologize for going over.
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
I think it could be a foolish question. Can devotees be both loving and powerful? Because sometimes devotees, they serve more and they think that they are serving Krishna more than others. So can they be both loving and powerful?
Well, that's an interesting question, because we were talking about how God can, he's all loving and all powerful, but that's certainly a valid question with devotees too. The thing with devotees, say that last part of the question again, because you said something about.
Sometimes some devotees serve Krishna more and they think they are more powerful than others. So
okay.
can they be loving and.
Now that's you kind of answered your question there when you said they think they're more powerful than others. When we think that we're the doer of our advancement, I am more advanced because I did this, then actually we're not really advanced. That's the definition of self-conscious, right? And not Krishna conscious. Now, it's tricky here though, because I want to make sure that we understand this fully before, because this can get away from us really quickly. When we observe someone's behavior, we don't know what their consciousness is. We may think that, oh, this person is proud, or this person thinks he's better, and it might not necessarily be the case. We can understand what our own consciousness is. We can understand that if we're acting in a deceitful or a proud way, but we can't necessarily see that in others, and we definitely shouldn't try to see that in others, because it's a very dangerous thing. What we should do is just engage in our service with the consciousness that Krishna is in control, and I'm just serving him, and the results, that they're up to him, they're not up to me. If we engage in service that way, and then we don't interfere with anyone else's service, that's the best way to do it. We definitely don't want to get caught up in criticizing other service. Now, someone asks us for help in our devotional service, and they admit that, okay, I have a problem with pride, something like that. We can certainly, tell them about how, oh yeah, no, I've also have a problem with pride. Here are things that I've done that work. Here are things that, other devotees have done that work. We can do like that. But yeah, it can be a tricky situation when we try to kind of gauge someone else's level of spiritual advancement other than ours. So generally we should be definitely hard on ourselves. We should think, okay, I need to become a much better devotee, and I need to do this, this, and this to do that. But when it comes to others, if we see someone chanting Hare Krishna, then they're a devotee. We worship them, and that's just how that goes. That's the safest way to do it. We learned from Ambarish Maharaj and Durvasa Muni, that, you know, Krishna really, really, really loves his devotees, and he does not tolerate when someone blasphemes them or judges them in an improper way. So I just want to, I'm not saying you're doing that. I just wanted to say that when we when we look at these things, these are tangents that you can really quickly go off on. That's why I always clarify when I say these things. But to answer the question, if someone, like if I, for example, am doing some sort of service, and then I see that, oh no, I'm actually advancing in Krishna consciousness. If I then at that point say, this advancement in Krishna consciousness was a result of me doing this or that, then that means that I have the wrong consciousness, and then I won't be making any advancement with that mentality. Does that answer?
Yes, yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad I got that.
If I may chip in with a quick response to that lady. Back in India, there was a person called Rajagopalachari, who was the Governor General. And in one of his discourses, he said something that stuck with me this long. He said, pride of humility is wrong. And then he explained, the minute we think we are humble, humility has gone out the window and pride has replaced it, if that helps in any way.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
That's a good one. I'm glad you said that.
Okay.
Great. We're coming up on the top of the hour, so we should probably conclude the class at this point. I wanted to thank again Carucandra Prabhu for giving his time. Very informative. On a lot of different topics. Explained them extremely well. So thank you once again. Hopefully we can have you back again in the upcoming weeks.
It'd be my pleasure.
Wanted to let everybody know that tomorrow morning, Saturday morning, we'll be starting at 8 o'clock, and that'll be Hariashwar Prabhu's lessons on japa. This is dedicated so we can help improve our chanting of the holy names. And then every morning at 7:50, other than on Sunday at 7:50, we do the Srimad Bhagavatam class. So please join, and please invite your friends to come along as well.
Also, one more quick announcement. Jayadwaita Maharaj will be giving Sunday feast class on Sunday at Restaurant. I wasn't, you were breaking up a little bit, so I don't know if you mentioned that. But, hopefully all of you please join the lecture this Sunday at 4:30. Well, actually 4 o'clock, because we're going to be doing darshan and arti, and then 4:30 Jayadwaita Maharaj is going to be giving class on Bhagavad Gita. So please join us. It's going to be a great one.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much for the good class. Nice class.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu.
Enjoy.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Thank you.